What is happening, guys? Cowboy here, and welcome to my first AC showcase for Armored Core 6. And on this very first video, we're going to be taking a look at one of my go-to ACs for the campaign, for PvE content. This is Cold Steel. Now, this is a very balanced AC that it revolves around basically just taking out lots of enemies, lots of stagger buildup, and then a big follow-up on stagger. And one of the best things about this is you can put this together very early. By the end of Chapter 2, you should have most, if not all, the parts to build this. And throughout my playthrough, this was an AC that I fell back on pretty much anytime I was struggling. It's a very balanced loadout. It's very straightforward and simple. You don't need to worry about anything too crazy with this. And all in all, I think it is a great go-to starter AC. So let's jump in and talk about it, what we're using and why, and then we are going to jump in and show you a mission with it. So as for the weaponry, we are actually working with dual Gatlings for this. Now, one of the main reasons being is that the Gatlings are all in all just a very solid weapon, especially for PvE content. We have 1,300 rounds, which is fantastic. We have a relatively low ammunition cost, and just the sheer amount of bullets you can put out with these, it's very effective at helping to build the stagger up on the target so we can follow up with big direct hits, which is really what we want in PvE. This is going to be what allows us to burst past bosses. So, double Gats. Moving on from there onto our right back unit, we are working with the Songbird's Grenade Cannon. This is the earliest grenade cannon unlocked for the shoulders. All in all, very solid weapon. It fires out 2 grenades. The direct hit adjustment is only at 140, but this has a fair amount of range on the blast radius. So I find this to be really useful for helping to build the stagger, or even as a follow-up after you've already staggered the target. And one of the things that's really nice is the effective range on this, 625. And what this means is if there's a target that's way off in the distance, something that's artillery, for example, you can fire these off and they're going to take that target out without you having to get too close, which is really nice. So think of it like sniping artillery in a sense. Moving on to our left back unit. Now, for the left back unit, you're going to want to unlock in the OS chips the ability to use a weapon. And with that, we're going to be using the pile bunker. Now, until you unlock that, there are a couple things you could use. You could put on another Songbird. Alternatively, you could run some missiles. But once you unlock the OS chip, we are going with a blade. And in this case, we're going with the pile bunker. Now, if you're not as much of a fan of the pile bunker, the pulse blade is a relatively user-friendly alternative, but the pile bunker is fantastic because of the potency of the charged attacks. Now, one of the main ways I like to play this build is I rush a target, I burst through its stagger bar with my Gatlings, I'm going to follow up with a charged bunker attack, and then finish things off with a Songbird. And that's going to do a lot of damage in PvE. It's going to help you to really chunk bosses. On a stagger, you're going to chunk a boss for at least a third of its health on average. So very, very strong build. And the pile bunker, for the most part, it's just sitting there. It's just sitting on our back, waiting for us to use it. Moving on to the head, we are working with the Basho. Now, the Basho isn't particularly amazing, but it does have relatively high AP. Just looking at it compared to a couple of the other heads, you can see really nice AP on this, pretty solid defenses all around. And since this is a upfront and personal style playstyle, where we are looking to basically rush down our enemies with the Gatlings and get that pile bunker hit, we want something that's going to be beefy, and the Basho will accomplish that. Moving on to our core, we have the Tian King. This is another example of that. We have relatively high stability on this, we have very high AP on this, and it's just another piece that for the most part, since you can get it early, it's going to really get you through if you're just looking for something that is nice and beefy and strong. Moving on to the arms, we have the Melander. Now, this is actually a more balanced piece. There are quite a few pieces, as you can see, that are going to have more AP as well as more arm limit. But one of the really nice things about this is we have decent firearm specialization, and in particular with the firearm specialization here, that is going to be something that can really help us out because it's going to impact our ability to track targets with our ranged weaponry. And while the Gatlings do fire a massive flurry of bullets, the better those bullets are going to be able to track, the faster we're going to be able to build up the stagger. And just looking through, you can see for the most part, we are maintaining that firearm specialization stat. There are a couple that are going to surpass it, but generally when they do, we're taking other big sacrifices. So having the 128 on that, the firearm control, I found that to be very reliable. Moving on to the legs, we are also working with the Tian King, and very similar to the chest piece. This is a solid piece that just has really good AP on it. We have relatively nice attitude stability, and it just makes it a very straightforward piece to get the job done. Moving on to our booster, we have the Alula. Now I want to say this one's unlocked towards the end of Chapter 2, but the main benefits of this is it has very nice quick boost thrust, very nice thrust in general, and a relatively low quick boost reload time at only 0.35 seconds. There's a couple that can outperform it in certain categories, but I found this to be a very balanced piece with a focus around thrust and quick boost thrust, making it just kind of a good all-rounder. Moving on to our FCS, the G2 P05. Now this is primarily a medium range assist, and that's going to be the majority of the range we're talking in. Medium range is going to be between 130 and 260, which is typically where we're looking to shoot at. And then there's a little bit of close range follow-up just to help us for once we're rushing on in on the target. Another early part that works quite well with this build. Lastly, moving to the generator, the VP20C. Now, I believe this one is unlocked at the end of Chapter 2 or possibly early Chapter 3, but this is just a very, very solid generator. I use this on a ton of ACs. It's extremely balanced. We have respectable capacity. We have a decent recharge, decent supply recovery, post-recovery, and even if you're using energy weapons, it's right at the baseline. So while it doesn't benefit, it also doesn't have a negative. But until you unlock this, you could get away with multiple different generators. You can see all of these other generators, except for the starter one, is supporting the low requirements for this AC. But once you get access to the VP, I would highly recommend it. Moving on to the expansion slot, you can really go with either Pulse or Assault Armor here. Pulse Armor is obviously great just to help shrug off stagger damage, that extra 3,300 AP roughly for 10 seconds, just allowing you to further be aggressive on the boss. But Assault Armor is just fantastic all around. If you are a very aggressive player and you're constantly staying up on the target, Assault Armor is a decent choice. If you find yourself struggling more and you think you want a little bit more defense, I'd suggest Pulse Armor. Now, if you're really struggling on bosses and you find yourself getting hit by attacks and instantly dying, that's where I would consider something like Terminal Armor. Personally speaking, I'm not a big fan of it. I would suggest playing around either Pulse or Assault, but at the end of the day, I would suggest going with what you find works the best. So pulling that all together, we actually have a pretty solid AP. Or a pretty solid AC. Our AP up at 11,560, decent amount of defenses all around, and the biggest thing here is we're just going to be able to put in a ton of damage with this AC. We're really going to be able to get on top of stuff and push out the stuns via the Gatlings. So, for the sake of showing this off, we're going to jump into Attack the Watchpoint. Pretty early mission in Chapter 1. This is the mission where we fight Volteus, so obviously I have had lots of practice against this guy, but you know, since it is just on top of release, I didn't want to showcase anything too late game with this build.
Main system activating combat mode.
Leave no evidence. If anyone sees you, handle it.
Code 1-5, intruder sighted. Just one AC. Who are they with? We can look into that later. Engaging. Requesting backup. I can't get through to HQ.
The cavalry isn't coming. Wipe them out in 6-2. Confirmed. Enemy squad destroyed. Move on to the next area.
Repair kits remain.
You can see already we're able to put out a ton of damage very quickly onto those MTs.
What happened to the patrol squad?
Code 1-8, all units deploy for combat.
You're exposed to snipers from all quarters. Keep moving, they'll shoot you down.
And there's what I was talking about with the artillery. Even though we were a little bit farther away on that, we were able to just fire off the songbirds, take that target completely out of the equation.
Updating your marker data. Proceed in the direction indicated. Do you see that? That's the Watchpoint's control center. The target's inside. Make your way in.
Attacking a watch point.
Is that?
So against enemy ACs, this is a pretty straightforward build. We're going to focus on Gatlings. When we have aerial superiority, that's when I'm going to throw out the grenades. And once we get the stagger, we go in and we hit with the bunker, and you can see already huge damage on Sula here, and that's exactly what we want with this. If you can get the charge tit off, you're going to do a devastating amount of damage, as you saw. And in some cases, if you already have an AC down to about 50%, a charged bunker hit, when they are staggered, in some cases, can completely kill an enemy AC outright, preventing it from even having a chance to start healing.
In the center.
So now that we are on to the actual boss fight, I'm just going to be incredibly aggressive here. And I'm just getting right on top of the boss, you'll notice here. Staying right on top of it, and then when I have the chance, big hits there. Also follow up with a songbird. You can see very easily we are able to apply an immense amount of pressure via those gats, take down the shield, take down the stagger that Baltius had, and push it into a spot where we are able to then hit it with that follow-up bunker, hit it with those songbirds, and do a lot of damage. And even then, you can see we've only run through about half our ammo. We had a little bit over 800 in terms of ammunition on both of those gats still. So all in all, a very straightforward build that is still capable of putting out a lot of damage, and most importantly, a lot of stagger damage to really give us an opportunity to hit those heavy follow-ups. So that is going to wrap things up for this one. I do plan on doing videos on quite a few different ACs. For now, at least, since I'm still offline, I don't have the ability to fully upload this, but once I do, I'll upload this design. I'll put the code, or however that system works, in the description, as well as pinning it in a comment. But like I said, very straightforward build, capable of putting out a ton of damage, and all in all, just a very safe playstyle as well, I think. So thanks for coming on by. If you're struggling, hopefully this helps you out. I'll have plenty more guides coming your way, and I hope to see you then.